Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Building with OpenTok series. My name is Monik, and today we'll be discussing OpenTok Insights. We have a special guest today, Hashir. So,
hey guys.
Hashir.
Yeah, so I'm a senior PM here at TalkBox, and I oversee the Insights product, and we'll be talking about that today, and I'll be getting that.
Thanks, Hashir. So I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen, so you should be able to see it. So today we're going to, just before we get started, we want to talk about some of the previous webinars that we've done. We've covered a lot of topics such as React Native, Electron, embeds, and you can see the list. But besides the Building with OpenTok topics, we've also done topics on GDPR and things like that. So if that's really important to you or your product team, please have them check them out. And if there are any webinars that you want us to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat or the poll. Speaking about the poll, please answer those. We've asked some questions about GraphQL insights, so it'll be really great if you can answer them and kind of give us an understanding of where you are with it. Now let's get started. Today's agenda, we're going to cover OpenTok basics, Insights introduction, some dashboard, and the actual API with GraphQL, and a live demo, obviously. So just to take a step back, OpenTok basics are really important in building any OpenTok application. They're concepts that are useful for iOS, web, mobile, Android, or anything that you're using with the platform. And these are sessions, tokens, publishing, and subscribing. So now let's take a deep dive into these individually. A session is a virtual room where users interact. So we're all in a session right now specifically. This has a unique session ID attached to it. And then this generates on your app server. And I'll show you the API model in just a little bit. This is where users publish and subscribe. There's multiple types of sessions. So you have a session where media is going peer-to-peer, which is relayed. And then we have a routed session where the media is going through something in the middle. Think of a middle person, an SFU that cascades that stream out to other people in there. This is really good for using archiving, broadcasting, just like we are. And if those topics interest you, make sure to check out one of the past webinars. And then if you want to use features like SIP, you need to go the routed way. Now, in order to get into each session, you have to have a token. A token is a user's key into the session. It's an authentication system. It can have data that you can use to describe the person who's using the token. We don't recommend you using your personally identified information within the token, but it's a way to know if it's user 1 or user 2 and so on. So now this token can also expire after a period of time. So if the token is actually expired within 3 seconds, you won't be able to use it anytime after that. And lastly, publishing and subscribing. So right now in this specific webinar, Hashir and I are publishing to the audience and everybody else is subscribing to our stream. So that's how easy it is to understand publishing and subscribing. So it's a way for people to send video, and then subscribing is a way to view this video essentially. Lastly, I want to talk about the whole API model that I mentioned earlier. So you can see with my mouse hovering over, this is your application server. So this is where everything kind of starts out. This is where you make a request to OpenTok the cloud, either using the Server SDK or our REST API to create a session, so create a virtual room, and then you use that session to create a token with it. And then you pass that information to a client, and that client could be either a browser or a mobile device or a Windows SDK, whichever one you're using essentially. And then in the client itself, you'll do you'll initialize the session and you'll initialize the publisher and so on. So all of the data that we're going to be talking about specifically today with the Insights API is actually collected, it's with the cloud. So you'll need to interact with that essentially to get that information as well. So I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it off to Hashir now to talk about Insights, the overview, and what he has planned for the product.
Thanks, Monik. So before I get into Insights, I want to step back and kind of have you really understand what we're talking about here. So TalkBox has video, and there's metadata about that video, what's happening in the calls, what the quality is, how much usage you have, where you're having errors, and there's a lot more information other than that too. So really what Insights is doing, or the goal of Insights, the Insights product, is to give you, using that information that we have, and help you take actionable decisions. There's also some vanity metrics in there that are nice to look at, but really what we want you to be able to do is make your application better using these insights. And we've got a couple of tools to do that so far. So first of all, we have the Insights dashboard. Now this is in your account portal. And it's kind of a visual tool that you can click around and get an overview, like a report level view of what's going on in your project. Aside from that, we have project and session API. So these are both APIs that you can use using GraphQL. We're going to get to that in a second. And what I want to make clear here is that actually the dashboard that we've made, it actually uses this exact API. So everything that I show you in this dashboard, it's not built on a service that's kind of like the API. It is actually built on the same API that you're going to be seeing later today. Smart notifications I'm going to touch on just right now. It's in beta, and if you want, you can email the beta address. We'll drop that in the comments. But it's our attempt at giving you single action sentences that will tell you to do something based on the insights, because we already have this information. So we're trying to also, at the same time as you guys view the data, we're also trying to give you guys hints at what you might be able to do. And you'll see these notifications show up in your dashboard. So there'll be things like, hey, your SDKs are almost out of date. Maybe it's time to upgrade. Or maybe your browsers that your users are using are out of date. Maybe you can give them a message and have them upgrade. So things like that. So with that, I'm going to jump into the Insights dashboard first. And like I said, this is going to be inside your account portal. You're going to navigate to the left-hand side, pick the project that you want, and click on it. And I'm already in this view, so I'll just scroll down and get right into it. So the first thing you're going to see is that there's three kind of filters at the top in this Insights dashboard. There's the date range, there's the location. Oops, I already have this set to India. Let me back up and go to the global level. And we also have endpoints. Below that, we have three kinds of metrics that we're giving you. We have the usage, the quality, and errors. So first of all, let's start off with usage and see what we can find in here. So what I'm going to do is look at stream subscribe minutes. And initially, you're going to see that we have sort of this chart. Actually, you know what? I'm going to uncheck these other ones so we're not distracted. So we're just looking at stream subscribe minutes. And you can see over the last few days, we've had a healthy, in this demo application that we have, this is an actual app that's in the wild, by the way, we've got a good, healthy stream of minutes coming in. So as you scroll down, you'll see this kind of Google Analytics style heat map of where that's coming from. Now, we had previously shown this information for the minutes, but now we're actually showing you where those minutes are coming from. And you can see a couple things over here. In fact, let me zoom in just a bit to give you guys a better view of that. So you can see that most of our usage is in the US, and that's sort of what we expect, to be honest. But we also have some activity in the UAE, some in India, and I think that's the Philippines over here. So below that, we can also see what the breakdown is. Now remember, the filters on right now are global filters. So right now we're looking at all countries and all endpoints for this date range. And in the United States, globally, we can see that the distribution of our endpoints is 46% JS, just over 30% for Android, and about 20% for iOS. Now, if you click on the US, though, and by the way, the US is broken down by region too. So you can just for the US for now, we may add other regions later. You can even go into Texas and see like, hey, Android usage is much higher in Texas than in the US as a whole. And as a whole, the US is predominantly JavaScript. So that raises an interesting point. If globally we have pretty high 30% or so Android usage, but for the US, we have predominantly JavaScript, something else must be making it up. Now, I could poke around for a while here, but I'm gonna guess that India, you already saw that I had India selected before, so I've tried this before. But India, it has way more Android usage, right? But what's actually surprising to me, and I didn't know this before, is that iOS usage is also pretty substantial. It's about almost 20%. But let's focus on our mobile then. So mobile usage in India is pretty dominant, almost 75%. But I have some questions now. How does the quality of those devices look like? So I can scroll up here and jump over to the quality tab. Now usage is provided for everyone. Quality and errors tabs are provided for growth and enterprise customers. So we can hop over. We're still, if you look at the top, the date range stays the same. Our location stays the same as India, and we had all endpoints selected. And we can see that's the sort of bitrate chart. Now, I don't want to go too deep into quality, but the gist of this is that the higher the bitrate, typically, the better the video quality is going to be. And 2 to 300 is not bad. 300 is actually 300 and above is pretty good, but let's say 60% of people in India overall, they have some reasonable bitrate. So that's a good thing. But let's see how it compares across devices. So, take a second to make your guesses. So let's see what happens on Android. Well, it didn't look like it changed much, and that makes sense because Android was the dominant usage in India. So yeah, it makes sense that the overall graph would look very similar to Android. Now let's compare to iOS and see what happens. And you kind of saw a jump at the top end, right? So maybe we got 10% more from this bucket onwards. So people with iOS devices have slightly better quality for their streams. And yeah, so that just kind of gives you, so you have to be a little careful here, right? That doesn't mean that the device is causing better quality. It could be that people with iOS devices have better networks, but it does give you a little bit of insight into what's going on, and maybe you can take some next steps. So for the sake of thoroughness, let's also go over to errors and see what's happening. Now, we're still on iOS in India, and we're seeing this connection error rate is, even if we kind of try to ignore the spike a bit, let's say maybe around 3%, 2.5%, 3%. And let's see what that is for Android. For Android, you can see it's actually quite a bit lower. It's much closer to maybe 1.2% on average. So at this point, it would be reasonable for us to go into iOS and check out what's going on. Is it the SDK version that caused something to change? Is it perhaps it's something in our code and the way that we use it? Maybe it's how the users are using the app. So we're not sure now, but I think we have some reasonable information to investigate off of at this point. So just to recap, there's 3 filters that are global: date range, location, and endpoint. And we have 3 different tabs: usage, quality, and errors that you can get information from. So I mentioned that all of this is powered by this API. So I want to show you a little bit more what that API looks like. So before we move on, though, if you haven't, please answer the poll that we have asking about GraphQL. And that's the API. Oh, we did the dashboard demo. But I'm going to talk a little bit about GraphQL. That's the API type that we use to power this dashboard. And it's not just that we power the dashboard, but that you can use this API too. So GraphQL is similar to REST, but it's a little bit different. It was open sourced by Facebook in 2015. And the way it's different is that REST APIs, you typically have various different URL endpoints, and each of those correspond to a resource or an object. And for each of those objects that you want, you make a call to the URL, and you get some information back. With GraphQL, things are a little bit different. You're going to be having a single endpoint, and in your actual body, you're going to specify what you want to get. So we're calling this client-specified queries. And once you send those, you only get the data that you want back. What this means is you'll have fewer network requests because you're not having to make multiple calls to multiple different endpoints. You say exactly what you want in a single query, and you get back everything at once. There's also a great tools and open source community. So we're going to be showing you a tool next. It's called Graphical, and that's just one open source tool that we've adopted. But there's many libraries out there that you can use to parse the query, navigate the schema, and do many other things. So you should check that out. So just to kind of double click on the client specified queries here. This little GIF, we grabbed it from GraphQL's website. So you can see these colored servers are, I think these are supposed to be GraphQL servers. And there's a mobile phone here, and that's sort of making this call. And you can see that the call that's being made has, it's requesting a hero, the hero's name, the friends of that hero, and their friends' names. And only that is being sent back in the response. So it's kind of flashing back and forth, but you can see that the response only has the fields that were specified in the request. There's nothing like the friend's species, for example. It doesn't say that R2D2 is a robot, but maybe what the phone is displaying right now doesn't need to know that. It just needs to know the list of names. So this raises another question. It's how do you know what fields are actually going to be in the talk box schema? Because we don't have fields like hero and friends and things like that. We have things like sessions and connections and streams. So how do you actually determine what our schema looks like? And that's where this graphical interface comes in. So I'm going to give you a quick demo. And yes, graphical is GraphQL with an I in it. I'm sure they think they're very clever about that. And it is kind of cool. But this is this tool. And again, this is part of that vibrant community that we were talking about. This was an open source tool. And we've adopted this. And though the tool is open source, the schema that you're going to see in here and the queries that we're going to make in here, those will be specific to the TalkBox GraphQL Insights API. So I have a canned query in here to show you what's happening. But let me sort of, before I get into this, sort of zoom out and explain the tool a little bit. And we'll drop a link to GitHub's guide to using the tool. We thought about making our own guide, but quite honestly, the tool is the same. So GitHub does a great job. We'll drop that in the comments or description. And I'm gonna close this variables pane at the bottom over here so you guys can see the rest of this. I'm not gonna use this little pane at the bottom. You can read more about that in the GitHub in the GitHub URL. So there's three panes that are remaining. There's sort of this document explorer. There's the query pane on the left side. This is where I'm going to make the request. Just like that hero and friends thing that we saw, this is my request that's going out. And over here is going to be the response. See, is that hopefully that's zoomed in enough that you guys can all see it. And I'll open this up so you can see the request. So from the document explorer, you can see there's this query field. And that field is required for all GraphQL queries, no matter what. Under that is where it starts becoming custom to TalkBox. So once you click on this object that's returned by the query field, you're going to see what fields are available next at the next nested layer. And again, and in this case, there's only one, so you kind of have to include it. It's project. You'll also see that there's this, in purple, there's this argument that you have to include. And that's your project ID. So we're going to be showing information for the same project that we had displayed in the dashboard. So we've entered the project ID, project ID in the arguments field for project. And now we want to decide what other fields we want to have returned in our query. Account ID I don't really care about, and I already know the project ID, so I'm going to leave those out. Let's include the project data, and this corresponds to everything that you saw in the dashboard. This field contains all the project level, high level reports data that we have. And there's a number of arguments in here. I'm going to include a start date, an interval of daily, the SDK types that I'm interested in, JS, iOS, and Android. And I'm going to group the results by the SDK type. So you can see this query is already looking somewhat similar to a SQL query. That's really where the QL, the QL of the GraphQL comes in from SQL. From that, inside that project's return object, we'll see our resources, and we're going to decide to include the start date, the end date, the SDK type, and over here what I'll do is, these are all from this document pane. I'm going to show you guys something right here in the resources. We have usage, quality, and errors, and these correspond exactly to these three tabs, information in these three tabs. I'm going to focus on usage for now. There's a bunch of usage fields, but I'm just going to show stream subscribe minutes for now. So I've walked through that documentation pane. I've got my query set up, and I'm going to hit this play button to run it. I'm going to zoom out just a bit so we can see the response a little better. Let me show the response and get a little closer. Hopefully that's good. And you can see that the response maps over from the request. Only the fields that we asked for are there. So in the resources, we have start and end. And you can see that we started on the 10th of February. So the 10th and 11th for Android, we have, oops, why did that pop over? We have this many stream subscribe minutes, and that's it. Now let's say I wanted to add publish minutes. So I can say, actually, let's say I didn't even know what it was called. If I start writing published, well, first of all, if I left it there, it gives me kind of this hint. Hey, there's some sort of error here. But let's use the autocomplete, which is really cool. Stream publish minutes. And let's hit run again. We get almost the same response, except we also have the stream publish minutes as well. So that kind of, I hope that kind of explains that you can make requests for exactly what you want, and you'll get the response for only that information. And what hopefully this does, and I think this will be demonstrated even better in the next example, is that it makes you have less traffic over the network, better performance, less to parse through, and ultimately also less calls that you have to chain together. So actually, I'm going to hand it off to Monik, and what he's going to do is, so let me back up actually. So right now we're showing you everything in kind of this browser tool, so it doesn't feel real yet. So what Monik's going to do is he's going to actually show you on the command line, writing up a server from scratch, calling this interface, and making a query programmatically. And let's paint a different use case that uses the session APIs, Monik. So let's say that we want to go through let's say we have an application that has professors that screen share to students. So the professor publishes their video, they share their screen, and students only publish their video. And what we want to know is what browsers professors use for their screen share. It's a very specific question. What browsers do they use for their screen share? And maybe we have some inkling that it feels like one browser does better with screen share than another. And we start messaging professors that, hey, try using this browser, and we want to see how effective that messaging is. How effective that messaging is. So we're going to make a pie chart. Oh, we won't actually make a pie chart, but we're going to get data that could make a pie chart to display how this is going. So I'm going to stop my screen share, hand it off to Monik, and he's going to walk through this end to end from web server through constructing the query, and finally to actually obtaining that data programmatically.
Thanks, Hashir. So as Hashir mentioned, this is a graphical interface that allows us to kind of take a deep dive into constructing our queries and running them programmatically. But let's go back to the picture that Hashir painted. We want to get the video type and then the browsers that are being used for that video type. So if we were to imagine this as a regular REST call, we would kind of have to say, okay, we're going to get one session specifically. As you can see, I've kind of filled that session in here specifically, but you would have like a list of sessions, and you'd pull from that one session, and then you would pull in connections, and then you will pull in the browsers, the publishers, the streams, and so on. So you would have to actually chain these calls over the network to kind of get that specific result that you want. So with GraphQL, we'll have this client-specified query, and we'll just get back the results that we want. So we've constructed this query here. It looks like it's JSON, but it really isn't. It's simply a concatenated string, a templated string essentially, that we have information with, and we can run this. Now I'm actually going to run this to show you what the result will look like, and actually show you the network tab on what happens when we press run here. So before I run it, I'm actually going to open up my console. So Chrome Developer Tools or Firefox, whatever you use, you'd be able to accomplish it with that. And in my network tab, so let's see. Oh, let's go ahead and click network here. And when I run this, you'll see a request. So first off, a request went through. We got some information on, okay, which browsers are Chrome, and we saw the video type was camera. Now we're specifically looking for screen. So we can say, okay, sometimes we'll get a video type null, which means the client wasn't able to specify what type of stream video type it was. But let's keep going down to see the results that we actually want to see. Okay, so it looks like there was a browser, somebody was publishing with the camera and the screen, and they were using Chrome. So this is the kind of data that we were looking for with this specific query. Now, we want to be able to pipe this up in a chart, or for our case, show it with the server. So before we go there, I kind of want to show you here what that request payload looked like. This is just a regular post request. You can see that we're properties called query here. That's the key. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit so you can see a little better. Although that'll make it a little weirder for me, but there it is. So you can see that the query is the payload that we have here, and this is just a string that we put in, and this will make a little more sense as I show you on my app server. So there's actually 3 components specifically involved here. So you need an application server to be able to make this request to the Insights API server, and then you actually need the library or HTTP request. That's the second part of it. And the third part is rendering it on a browser or through a chart. And we'll take it step by step here today. So I've actually gone ahead and created a project. In this project, I've pulled in some dependencies. I'm using JavaScript, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with, PHP, C#, anything that you're really comfortable with, and use the respective libraries to create the server. I'm going to go ahead and pull in some dependencies. So for Express, because that's going to really power our server. Axios, this is the library we're using to make our HTTP request. Body parser, this is so we can parse the body, and our JWT token. And I'll come back to the JWT token in just a bit. So let's continue with creating our server here. I'm actually going to go ahead and copy some of the boilerplate code that I've added already. So we initialize the Express instance, we store it as a variable app, and we set our information for body parser. So
And just to be clear, this is all just running a standard web server. There's nothing special that's going on here so far.
Yeah, thanks, Asher. So we actually have this, and then we're actually going to just set one simple route, and I'll just set it to just slash. So when we hit this URL with the specified port that we set, we'll just be able to get hello world as a response back. So I'm going to go ahead and set the server to listen on port 3000, and then it'll log server started. So let's go ahead and see if that's working. Now you can see that we're not actually using our Axios library yet, or our JWT token, or some of the other things that are required. Where, as Asher said, we're simply creating a basic web server to just get, just to see if it gets started. So I'm going to open up my terminal here. Hopefully everybody can see it. It's a big size. And I'm going to run this. We're using Node, so just the index.js file that we created. And I'm going to switch tabs to Chrome. And since we're running this on 3000, I'm just going to go ahead, and there it is. We'll get the response back, hello world, which is what we've set. So now let's actually go to the GraphQL part, and let's make that request. There's a couple things we need. We need to pull in config. So we need an API key and secret. Now, I've already added that to a config file that's in this project. I'm not going to share that just because it's a secret that shouldn't be shared. Hence, it's called a secret. But I've stored it in config, which is just essentially like a JSON object, and you're pulling in the variables there. So you're going to need this to make our JWT token. So we created a helper method to kind of help you with this JWT token. We'll drop that link in the well, sorry, let me put that over here. We'll drop that link in the chat so you can actually go ahead and see how the JWT token is generated. Our server SDKs use the same methodology to kind of sign each request that we make to the OpenTok API. So if you use the REST API, you would still have to do this. Even if you use the server SDKs, they'll do it in the library. But this is required because we want to know who's actually making this request. This is why it's signed with your API key and secret, which is we pulled in from our config here.
And you didn't have to do that in that graphical tool because you had to log in. So we did that in behind the scenes. So that's why you're having to provide that over here versus in the tool.
Exactly. Awesome. So now that we've done this, let's actually make our request. To make our request, we're going to actually use our Axios library, and we'll have to feed it some parameters. So we'll actually have to say, okay, which URL do we want to hit? And I'll pull that in just a second. The method, we mentioned it was a post request, so we're just going to say post here. And I'll keep scrolling just there. And now we actually want to put in our data. So this is the body of the request that we want. I don't know if you remember, but I'll show it again real quick. The body is actually just query with the payload here. So I'm actually just going to go back and say, okay, query. And I'll fill in the query in just a second. We need some headers here. So we need to kind of say what type of request. So we're going to say content type. We're passing in some application JSON. And we also need to, pass in the authentication token that we talked about. So it's X OpenTok auth. And we'll create this on the fly. So we'll call this method called generate JWT. And we'll call it each time we make that request. So if somebody hits our app server, they essentially make a request. And we'll pass in some data, some headers with it, and see what happens. Now, to see if the request processes correctly or incorrectly, we'll have to use it returns a promise. So we'll say, okay, then, and if the data is returned, let's go ahead and actually send that status of 200 and send the data with it. So what we got back from the response. Now we're going to go ahead and stringify this, and the data structure actually looks like we're calling it data, but it actually has another property called data. So that's the real data that we're getting back from the GraphQL API server that we've created for OpenTok Insights. And then if there's something that goes wrong with the request, we'll say, oops, error. And similarly, we'll set a status, but this time let's set it to 500 because, something went wrong. We want to be able to identify that. And let's send in, and I'll stringify this again, the actual error that happens. So now that we're doing this, we don't need this hello world anymore. And you can see that if this request processes through, we'll send in the data that was requested. And then if it fails, we'll put it in the catch statement. Now, there's a couple things that we still need. We need the URL and we need the query. So let's go ahead and grab the URL. I do want to share something. You can see that we're at insights.opentalk.com, which pulls up the OpenTok API Explorer. But what we really need is the URL that the request is made to. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and pull this in. The request URL is insights.opentalk.com. /GraphQL. So this is where we're going to make the post request to.
And you can find that in the guide that we have for the Insights API, and we'll link that in the comments also.
Yeah, and if you found this, something that you want to follow along, we also have a blog that walks you step by step on this. So definitely check out our blog, and we'll drop that link in there as well.
Yeah, so that blog covers pretty much this exact use case that we're covering.
So we're just trying to create content with video, obviously, and blogs as well. So here we have, a query. We just need the query. We need to actually put in the request that we want. And remember, we just said it's a post request. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to my code here, and let's call this request query. I'm not that creative right now, so we'll just call it what it is. And then I'm going to remove these quotes because we don't need these. And now you can see that we're still putting in the project ID, the session ID that's concerned. You can put this in programmatically. This could be a variable. This could be a variable. So it's not that it has to be hard coded like this. But for the sake of the demo, that's what we're going to go through. And now we're going to put this in, and this will be the value, or for payload that we're going to send with query here, and this is the value that we're going to send. So if everything works as expected, which we really hope it does because it's a demo, we'll get some response back with the browser. So I'm actually going to go ahead and restart my server because I've made some changes and the server wasn't watching the changes. So the server started. Let's go into Chrome. And if all goes well, when I hit reload, we'll get some results back. Awesome. So as you saw, I got some result back. The change there, the flickering, that's actually an extension I'm using. I'm using this extension to make this a prettier way of receiving data. But what the takeaway here is, you'll be able to, the data that you're getting here is exactly the same as the data that you saw. I'm going to go ahead and close this so we don't need this anymore. The data that we saw here. So this is the data object, project session data, and so on. And we'll see this here. So that was a way of us constructing the query that we wanted to look in, but this was the programmatic way of doing it. So the API Explorer is really helpful to make all the different queries that you need for the the quality, the errors, the usage, or session session summary data, and then you can put that in and use your web server to make that request for you.
One thing I wanted to just clarify on it, could you go back to the query itself in your code?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the query itself is what we got from the Graphical Explorer, but it looks like JSON, but it's actually a big string. If you could scroll down to the body, you'll see the post body that's actually sent. The body has a query, and that actually sends that the actual string query as a string. So hopefully that's clear. It can be a little bit confusing at first, but just make sure you understand that point.
And if it's something that like, hey, it was hard to see at first, you can definitely just go back to the the API Explorer and pull up the network tab, and it'll show you exactly what's happening. So just for the sake of redundancy, essentially, I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to hit this query, and we'll get this data back. And you can see here, this is just a string. So as Harsha mentioned, as mentioned earlier, this is just a string with the property set to query, and the value of that is just a string, which is your query. It looks like JSON, but it really isn't. It's GraphQL's way of doing things. So yeah, awesome. So now that we've gotten our data back, now that we've seen what we can, at this stage in time, you can either pull this data in for what you want, or pull up a sample application where, you can put this into a chart, and we have a sample application that shows you how to do it. So we've created this Insights dashboard sample. We'll drop the link in the chat, and you can pipe in usage. You can pipe in SDK distributions, all this. So this application is open source on GitHub. It'll ask for some configuration that you need. So your API secret, your API key, things that we set in. And then obviously the way to show you samples on how to use this. So pie charts, bar charts, histograms, you'll see all sorts of samples in this one. And before I pass it back to Husher, I do want to say, please answer our polls. If you have any questions, definitely ask a question there and put it in the chat so we can address it in a Q&A in about 5 minutes. So in the poll, we're asking if you've used GraphQL, so definitely ask that again. Okay, looks like, all right, I'm going to pass this back to Husher now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and let's get Husher's screen back on the board.
Thank you. So yeah, I just want to recap on some of the use cases for this API. We saw that you can create dashboards. You can do that for yourself to monitor things. You could actually even do that for your customers. You can use the API. Let's say you have a hospital or a bank as a B2B business, and you want to show them their QoS for video. Maybe you could even charge for that and offset some of the costs that you have for your video, and provide that to them. You can understand your customer calls by segment, and that we kind of did that with looking at what kind of the quality was for different endpoints in different regions. So you're not just looking at kind of a global quality, like how is everyone, and not really understanding what's happening where. And in turn, what you can do with that is, let's say that somebody comes to you and says, hey, I had bad quality. You can find out how things were going for them, and then look at their region and their endpoint and see, hey, was that really bad quality, or was it kind of the normal for what we expect from there? Before you start digging in and debugging really the nitty-gritty of the specific call. You can make better business decisions. You could find that the UAE has organic growth for your application, and spend some marketing dollars there, get some good ROI. You can message users to improve their experience, like we talked about messaging that professor to say use a specific type of browser for screen share. You can monitor historical trends in that dashboard with just a few clicks. And definitely, last but not least, you can take all of this data, plug it into your favorite machine learning framework or service, and get something interesting out. So, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that AWS, Google, Microsoft, and a bunch of other people are offering as services to take data and gain some insights out of them using ML and AI. So right now, we're actually giving you your data. You can store it. You can do whatever you want with it. And it's really up to you. At this point, it's yours to take and handle however you choose. So a lot of the things that we talked about, the Insights APIs, as well as the smart notifications that I talked about, they're in beta. Smart notifications, please email us if you want access to that. It's pretty early. We just released it. So if you have any other feedback or you find any issues, mail them to insightsbeta@talkbox.com. Even if you have specific fields that you don't see right now, we're continuously expanding the API. We want to include in the session APIs QoS per session. We also want to include events, so that stuff's not all there yet. So keep in touch with us if you want to be more involved in that process. This is a great time to get feedback, and I'll be monitoring that email address. And I think from there, unless Monica, you have anything else, we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, and so I actually wanted to go over the poll just to get some answers in.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna actually go back and share my screen again. You'll see me sharing my screen, and looks like we have the wrong screen shared. So this can happen when you're doing a demo. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my application window here specifically. So here it is. So hopefully everybody can see the ultimate loop. Apologize for that. I'm going to go ahead and click a poll here.
This is always a cool effect.
Yeah. So you can see this poll. So some of the questions that we asked earlier today was, are you using the dashboard? It looks like some of the folks aren't, and some people are using, so it looks like a pretty even split, with more leaning towards yes. If you haven't answered any of these questions, I'll say it again, please do it so. The next question that we asked was, are you using GraphQL, or if you've used it before? And it looks like a lot of people have not used GraphQL. Highly recommend it if it solves some of your use cases that we mentioned about not making too many network calls and things like that, getting specific data back. And if you have used it, we've got the information in the chat, so we'll pull that through. And then it's also asking, have you started looking at the API? So the API uses GraphQL. Looks like some people have, and a lot of people haven't. Hopefully, this was a good opportunity for you to see, what that API would look like, the work that would involve for you specifically. So if you haven't answered them, please answer them again. And now we're going to switch it over to questions. It looks like we have 3 questions already ready to go. So let's go ahead and pull that together. And Hasher, I feel like a lot of these questions are going to be for you, so I'm going to call on you to answer all of them because I've went through them already.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the first one is, how can it retrieve quality metrics such as bitrate, packet loss, and latency for a specific session through Insights API? So right now we don't have that. We have quality metrics for the project level. We're actually working on that right now to get the actual quality metrics. If you guys are interested, send an email to that email address that I sent you. We're working on how that API is going to look today. So the QoS metrics for specific sessions should be showing up soon. And really, to give you kind of a sense of how we're modeling that session API, it's sort of mirroring off of the inspector tool. So all the stuff that the idea is that everything that you have in inspector today, we will try to provide that to you in the QoS API, or in the session API really. But we're doing it piece by piece. Right now we have user info. We're going to do QoS next, and following that, we're going to do events. So we are aware that that's a kind of a popular request, and it's coming soon. So the next one are insights available on all plans. So the usage, if we're talking about insights, we consider that kind of the umbrella sort of term for all of the tools we talked about and all of the APIs we talked about today. The insights APIs that we discussed today are in beta, and they're open for everyone. We will probably start adding pricing to that at some point, but right now everyone's welcome to use it, and I think we can come to some sort of agreement with you on an individual basis of how you can get grandfathered in potentially. The dashboard, the usage is available for everyone. The quality and error tabs are open to our growth and enterprise customers. If you really don't want to get on those plans but just want to get the insights only, get in touch with us and maybe we can work something out. Another question is, how quickly does the data age out? So for the project dashboard, what we do is we have data that goes pretty far back. I would say, well, we're really not getting rid of it at all. But what we are doing is we're making it more coarse as we go back in time. So for daily usage or quality or errors, for the daily metric, you can get back about 60 days. I don't remember the exact number, but about 60 days. After that, we sort of roll it up into weekly intervals. So you can still get data going back about a year or two, but then it's the most granular you can get it is in weekly intervals. And then after that, we go monthly. And the idea here is that as you go further and further back, you're probably looking at trends in that dashboard. And so probably you don't care about what happened on a daily basis 2 years ago. So at that point, we show it monthly. And the next question we have, so hopefully, let me touch back on the session APIs. So that was for the project APIs. For the session APIs, we're going to have a retention policy of the same as inspector. And right now, I believe that's 21 days. I think that's 3 weeks. That's correct. So right now, that's our retention policy for the session level. Now, the good thing is that you can just continuously obtain your data. Hopefully, you don't slam us too hard, but you can continuously obtain your data for that, store it wherever you want, and at that point, it's yours forever. So that's kind of part of this. We don't want to be storing historic data for all video sessions across our whole platform all the time. So we're doing our best to aggregate it for you, and you can store it and use it however you want for as long as you want at that point. The next question is, any chance you provide the ability to get the GraphQL query from the TalkBox portal UX section? Since they're based on the same API, it may help as a starting point. Yes, actually, that is there. Let me see if I can quickly do a screen share. Sure. And I'm just going to jump back and show you how to do that. So at the top, right next to this dashboard, it says view the raw data. If you click that, it will actually open the exact canned query for that view. It's a pretty large query because it has usage, quality, and errors in this case. But that is the exact query that gives you back the information that we have in that dashboard. So yes, you can get that. So let me actually go again here, and being told that maybe I moved too fast and the screen share didn't catch it. So let me zoom in. So in the Insights dashboard, right at the top, next to the sort of label, there's view the raw data. You just click that, and it takes you to the graphical interface. And I'm going to open this up for you.
It almost seems magical.
Yeah, and that's already there. And yeah, like I said, like we literally use this to power that, and this is that same information. All right, so
thanks, Asher. So looks like that was the last question. Please, we're still here for another minute or so. So if you have a question, you can ask away, or you can comment, and we can address it, after the webinar. So we're gonna wait just about 30 seconds, awkward silence, and then we'll call it a webinar after this.
And we'll also, if there is a recording, I think we start posting these now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the recording is available. Great question, first of all. Recording is available immediately after. So what happens is, as soon as this webinar finishes, the recording is available on Crowdcast. But we're actually offloading these on YouTube as well. So if you wanted to check out any of the previous webinars or this one, we'll put this on YouTube. And then soon they'll be showing up on our Developer Center as resources for you to check out. So you'll definitely see that again.
And we'll put we've talked about a couple of resources, so we'll link all of those in the description for the recorded videos as well.
Yep. So Husher, there's another question because I know it happens all the time.
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so you can see it. But the question is around single request. So let's make that happen.
More than one project in a single query request. That's a great question. Right now we haven't really done that, but I mean, we could discuss it. I think that's really the point of the beta. I think if there's a reasonable use case and it spans across enough people, then I understand why you would want to do that. If you wanted information from more than one project at one time, that would be very cool. Right now we don't though. So get in touch with us, Chris, and we can talk and perhaps we can start considering to add that.
Thanks, Roger.
We got another one in the chat. Yeah. So if a publisher is having issues with reliable connectivity, for example, too many subscribers and the video freezes, can you tell us how we could use the API to troubleshoot issues, or at least get specific info on how to troubleshoot with reliable, for example, too many subscribers and the video freezes? I think, yeah, I wouldn't have the answer off the top of my head. I would start looking at their publisher's endpoint. If it has a lot of subscribers there, then it's possible that it could be that because if the endpoint isn't very strong, its compute power, even if the network's good enough, it could be that its compute power isn't strong enough to ingest all those streams. But I think that's really not, I'm not saying that is definitive. I'm really saying that's one possibility. It could be a lot of things that for that specific scenario, and I would have to get into it.
Yeah, you could use Inspector as well. So
I was just going to say, go ahead.
No. Oh, so just to get into it, definitely check out Inspector. It's one of our most prominent tools. You'll plug in the session ID, and you'll see the individual logs show up, and you can start debugging, and that's a great way to get started. And if it really doesn't work out, definitely send us an email at support@talkbox.com with the specific session ID that you're concerned with, and we can dig a little deeper and help you out there as well.
But it would be good to find out what devices they are and where they're located. All the information that we talked about, region and device type and things like that, all of those things are relevant to that. So yeah, I think the goal is, I mean, we don't have all of the data in the Inspector in the session APIs yet. Really the goal is to be able to see when you have a question that's confusing and maybe a single session doesn't give you an answer, that looking across sessions, if you find some sort of trends, then you start understanding the answer to these questions as well. So hopefully that sort of answers it. I can't speak to the specific session ID or use case you're talking about, but that is the point of the APIs. Awesome.
Thanks, Asher.
Great question, Charles, by the way. Thanks, folks. Appreciate all the good questions and everyone joining.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Bye.
Bye.